let's go learn something.
One of the things I love about my job is just how much there is to learn. Today's no exception. In Southeast Queensland, there's a really active flooding community of practice. Today, they're hosting an event and it's looking at how floodplain management and geomorphology fit together, how they can work together. Now, I'm not an expert in either of those fields, but I'm really keen to go along, see what I can learn, see what I can find out.
We've got a mixture of a few things happening. So this morning we're going to hear from Jackie Crow. Here there's some snippets of some fantastic work that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years. At lunchtime we're actually going to leave. We're going to go on a bit of a field excursion. Jackie and her team are going to take you to a few of the sites that they did some of their research on and explain some of the things that Jackie talked about this morning.
Before we get into this, I feel like this video might need a little bit of context. Now, there was more to this session than I could possibly hope to squeeze into this video, but there was a theme running through it. And for me, this gentleman put it really well.
Just the dynamics of it all, I suppose, is the interesting thing. You know, it's not a static thing. And if you look at it in one sort of, blink in time, that could give you a false sort of impression of what it's like. So looking at it sort of a longer scale.
Dynamic. Dynamic was the word tied into everything.
This region is, in terms of the agricultural food bowl of Queensland. So these sort of images raise these questions, you know, how often do these events happen? You know, how can we better understand not just when they're going to happen, but their impact on the landscape? This project was undertaken in southeast Queensland. Although we focused predominantly here on the Lockyer, we also, Darren's work extended to the Burnett, James' work extended to other systems in the southeast Queensland region. So it's not just an isolated example. People keep asking me all the time, you know, how representative is this of southeast Queensland? It's very representative. We had the luxury of time and resources to actually try and work out what's happening here. Quite often you'll find that we come into a particular area with a preconceived notion of how things actually operate. We take our understanding typically from the Northern Hemisphere, where climate is vastly different. We here in Australia have a climate that's characterised by floods and droughts. Our early settlers wrote poems of this. We need to embrace the fact that this is our climate. It is floods and droughts. We think of the river as a pipe, and we think that pipe runs down the middle of the catchment and it's completely separate to the floodplain. What we're trying to suggest here is that everything about that floodplain has been created by that river. They're genetically associated. The river creates the floodplain. Every time the river changes, the floodplain changes. What we had were these series of different sorts of surfaces. On our field trip this afternoon, you'll look out and you'll see what looks like a floodplain, and there's very subtle differences in elevation and topography. There's a whole array of different floodplain types out on this surface that you'll see today.
You'll see I've got a yellow line drawn across from the Lockyer on the top, across the floodplain as it comes down the page, and then a little plot in there which is our floodplain. It's sort of showing the natural levee, the high point against the Lockyer, and the steep flow towards the outer edge of the floodplain. And we got about 5 metres elevation change there, so you can imagine once the water gets out of the Lockyer where it's going to go.
So at the moment we're on the Helena Terrace. So this was the primary floodplain during the late LGM, so about 10,000 years ago this was the active surface.
After explaining about the surface that we were standing on, James then explained about the next surface down below us.
This inset surface here is what we refer to as the hydraulic floodplain.
So its inundation frequency is still about a 50 to 100 year event. So the landholder here experienced, basically lost all of his cattle. There's another further inset surface which you can't really see. It's probably lined where those little row of trees are. That would be the bench. And that would be the surface, which is maybe about 30 meters wide. That would be the surface, or the active floodplain. So in terms of getting an understanding of the different surface layers, it's really important. So this inset surface actually starts to grade with this surface downstream. So as we get to our third site, you'll see the distinction between these two surfaces becomes, it's really apparent here, but downstream they're actually very close together. So the slopes of these two surfaces actually change. This surface that we're on now actually becomes the primary floodplains.
Let's take a moment to consider that a little bit more closely with the help of these two knives. So obviously the creek is grading downhill from the top of the catchment down to the bottom of the catchment. But it's not the only surface we're interested in. We've got the creek itself, we've got the bench, we've got that inset terrace, we've got the high terrace that James was standing on, and all of these are broadly speaking grading from the top of the catchment down to the bottom of the catchment. But they're not all grading at the same rate. So if we picture this knife here as the high terrace that James was standing on, it's grading at a certain angle. And if we picture the top of it here being where we were standing and this point being some further downhill location, then we can bring in this second knife to represent the inset terrace. And this second knife is grading downhill, but at not such a steep grade. So up near this hand, the two terraces are relatively far apart, but as they both grade downhill at separate rates, they gradually get closer together by the time they get down to this hand over here. And that's what James was talking about.
It's a very challenging thing to say, where is the floodplain? It sounds like a very basic thing, but actually engineers have a completely different definition of the floodplain. Us as geomorphologists have a completely definition of where it is. It's not a straightforward task, because that we all stood on the banks of the Lockyer and immediately realised that this is a very big channel. Typically a floodplain in the Northern Hemisphere, or in an engineering sense, is an area that's flooded every 2.5 years. Now the dimensions on these macro channels here, unfortunately you can't see it, but we're talking about maybe 20 metres banks, 100 metres wide. Many of you will know that because you live on these. This is what we have subsequently referred to as a macro channel, a very big channel. Why is that important? That's important because if water gets out over here, it's already a big flood. We can contain up to a 50-year flood event within the boundary of these channels, on average. What does that mean? That means when it does flood, it's always going to be a big one. And that has very significant implications for how you might map and understand how these systems actually operate. So to illustrate that, this is the flood modelling that was done. The areas that are fully circled there, you can see the floodwaters from 2011 were fully contained within that channel. We had channels that were big enough to contain that volume of water. The thing is that they're not continuous. What we have is the typical assumption that as we increase our catchment area, our channel increases as well. In many cases, we have examples in nature where the opposite happens. So due to siltation or reduction in energy, we actually get a smaller channel down the bottom. And there's other examples where we don't get any relationship with increasing discharge at all. So why does that matter here? This is a graph of the size of the channel, so channel capacity in square meters and distance downstream. If you look at all the wiggles on that, there's no straightforward relationship. We had the luxury of seeing that because of the data that we had, but let's look at the point that goes up to almost 2,000 square meters before we drop into the channel at Grantham. The size of the channel at Grantham is about 300 square meters. So we had a channel immediately upstream that had the capacity to store that volume of water. We then have a channel immediately downstream that can only store approximately a third of that. So we had a situation where the swimming pool went into the teacup. This is the flood modelling image of Grantham. You can see if you go upstream here above the quarry that the water is fully contained within the channel, and then we have a situation where it spills out over the flood modelling. There was nowhere else for that water to go. The thing is that we weren't really prepared, we didn't have the understanding that the channels vary this
So this comes back to what we've been mentioning a few times, it's getting to know the different floodplain surfaces and the channel size. And so here we've got a floodplain that gets connected, inundated a lot more regularly than further upstream because of the constraints. As Jackie said in the morning slide, we've got the swimming pool and the teacup. We've just come from the swimming pool and now we're in the teacup.
In terms of freedom, this analogy here is that you put a person in a straitjacket, they're going to wriggle around until they try and escape. A river has the same desire, if you like. It has 4 degrees of freedom. It's always looking to adjust itself. And if we think of it as a pipe, we think that that pipe is set in place. We don't think about the fact that it's constantly having to adjust its width, its depth, its energy. It's always having to change, relative to how much pressure we're putting on it. If we put more sediment in that system, it's having to make itself wider to transport it. If we put more water in it, it's having to adjust. So the notion of channel adjustment is vital to our future understanding of floods. We cannot think of them as a static pipe that is not going to change relative to how we're adjusting to them. Kirsty Fryers from Macquarie went back through those early air photos and historical information. On the left here you can see a picture that was in the archives from the school, I think that's Gatton. The school teacher standing there watching the kids having a swim in the creek. The picture on the right is today. It hasn't changed. When we actually went back through the early maps and air photos, the width of the lockyer hasn't changed at all. It's been in the same position over the last 200 years. That immediately told us that something is locking this river in place. It doesn't have that freedom to adjust. So we started to investigate that bit. What happens when you lock a river in place, or it gets itself locked in? Actually, with humans are not the agent here necessarily, but what happens is it stays in place, and then over time it reaches a threshold. It will do something sort of fairly episodic. It's like getting out of the straitjacket. There is that release, and what we refer to that is a process called avulsion. Now, avulsion is when the river is flowing down the valley and then all of a sudden basically reaches a critical point and it hops somewhere else. It simply creates a new pathway for itself. Avulsions happen almost without warning. They are basically what we refer to as some sort of catastrophic adjustment. The river simply cannot contain either the volume of water or the sediment that is imposed on it. So it simply chooses to create the path of least resistance and it goes somewhere else. This is how the lockyer operates. The reason that you have very productive soil here is that we have predominantly silts in place in the alluvium. They're quite resistant material, and it's built up over thousands of years, and it's building up, and it's creating these levees. And when it gets to a critical point, it simply relocates to another part of the valley. The lockyer has done that maybe about 4 or 5 times in the last 200,000 years. This river system builds up in place, it builds up its levees, and then it reaches a critical threshold and it will simply relocate.
Looking at the bottom image here, the bottom orange is our bedrock paleo valley. And in this example here is just a large basin. The bedrock underneath this is a large basin. The yellows are our gravels, and they were laid down there 200,000 years ago. The white above the yellow of the gravels, the yellow is the gravels, the white represents this fine-grained clay and silts, a switch that happened about 100,000 years ago as we built this floodplain system up. In this first image here, you might see that the Lockyer Creek is annotated right out on the left, and it's actually sitting outside the deep trough of the bedrock, and it's up on the side. So the bottom of the Lockyer there is sort of basically sitting on bedrock, so we're not going to get any further incision there.
So at the moment we're on the Helidon Terrace. So this was the primary floodplain during the late LGM, so about 10,000 years ago this was the active surface. As we take the bus a bit later, we can actually see one of those paleo channels, so on the other side of the valley we'll cross over that. And that was active about 14,000 years ago when we had one of those avulsions that caused the lockyer to jump from the other side of the valley over there to this side of the valley here. And about 10,000 years ago, this top surface became abandoned as we cut down here to a lower surface.
The levee height is 4 meters higher than the adjacent floodplain. There are two things that are happening here. We're making the channel bigger to a certain extent. Every levee accumulation is adding more water within that channel. As soon as we add more water, we add more energy. We add more energy, we increase the capacity for rapid adjustment or very significant erosion. Either way, we're increasing the energy in that channel. So what we're suggesting here is that as these levees are building up, it's not sustainable. They're going to get higher and higher, and eventually there's going to be so much water stored within that single channel, it's simply going to look for the lowest point in the landscape, and it's already got something that's 4 meters lower, and it will come in at a different location. You know, the obvious answer is, well, how long, to a certain extent, before we might see the lockyer actually do that sort of adjustment in the future? And really, there are locations in the valley where we would suggest that that's possible in the order of decades. You know, the rate of levee accumulation now is fairly rapid. It's much higher than in the past, for example. We're building up these levees much faster, and we're simply approaching that threshold much quicker. You know, the size of the lockyer today is a very key clue that that river did not create 10 kilometres worth of valley floor. You know, down at the bottom ends, around Laidley and stuff like that, we have 10 kilometres of valley floor. The present lockyer did not create that. Every flood that's ever happened in the lockyer is recorded in its floodplain. This is the top part of that picture, is the 2011 flood deposit. It leaves a very clear marker. When we drive through today, it's very difficult with the naked eye to actually see something like that. You know, we can see that potentially the channel is smaller at Grantham, but we're not getting the connection between everything coming down the valley. So we need to get the connection of what's happening from upstream to downstream. I would have just assumed that this is a freely, you know, we've got 10 kilometres worth of floodplain down the bottom end. There isn't anything to the naked eye that shows us that the lockyer is in any way constrained. The big question to us when we came here was, it's got all this space. You know, why isn't it moving across the valley floor? Now that we understand the system better, how can we manage that system better, if you like? One of the first things that we would recommend is that we adopt the notion that there's a single floodplain in this valley, or anywhere for that matter. We simply don't have a surface that we can say that that's a floodplain, that's going to get flooded. We have a series of discrete surfaces that are built up over time that are very subtle. A static solution, you know, it's something that we have to get out of our head. You know, as we change vegetation, we're changing the capacity of the channel, we're changing the frequency of the floodplain, and it's really that dynamic evolution that we're trying to push here. You have to know which stage of evolution you're at. If I was to look at this river system and assume that it is the Murray and it's gently meandering across this beautiful alluvial plain, we'd do very different things. We would like to think that the story that we've told today and a lot of the work here can feed into some of the future management decisions, not just in the lockyer, but also